How ancient people slept, better than us, 1300 BC to 1600 AD. Welcome, friend. You found your way to History and Sleep, where stories from the past unfold slowly, quietly, and guide us gently into rest. Tonight, we begin a journey through a part of history that often gets left out of the textbooks: sleep. More specifically, how people used to sleep before the modern world reshaped our nights. We're calling this one, History's Forgotten Sleep Rituals. Because long before electric lights, TikTok scrolls, and late-night emails, sleep was not something we just crammed into the cracks of our schedules. It was sacred. It was social. It was strange. And people slept very differently than we do now. Tonight, we'll explore that world. A world where people didn't sleep in one single stretch, but in two. Where nighttime was broken into distinct phases. Where sleep wasn't always private, but shared. Where herbs like mugwort and valerian were brewed not just for healing, but for dreaming. And where spells, prayers, and charms were whispered into the darkness to keep nightmares and spirits away. And as we explore, I invite you to comment below, what part of this forgotten history surprises you the most? And where in the world are you listening from tonight? We love hearing from you. Really. It turns this quiet channel into a community. So now, settle in. Let your breath slow. And let's drift back in time. We'll begin with something that might sound unbelievable. But it's true. For much of human history, especially in pre-industrial Europe, people didn't sleep through the night in a single block. Instead, they practiced what's called segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep. That means they'd go to bed shortly after sunset, sleep for about 4 hours, then wake up for an hour or two, and then go back to sleep until dawn. They called these phases first sleep and second sleep. And it wasn't just one weird custom, it was normal. People wrote about it in letters, journals, medical texts. It was so common, it didn't need explanation. Like saying, I had lunch. Between first and second sleep, people would read, pray, even visit neighbors quietly. Some would stoke the fire, sip herbal infusions, reflect on dreams they'd just had. Others would write. Some of the most famous European thinkers did their best work in this quiet middle-of-the-night window. A 17th century writer, Roger E. Kirch, uncovered dozens of these references. In fact, it's thanks to him that the term segmented sleep entered modern awareness. His research showed that this two-phase sleep was common in Europe from the Middle Ages through the 18th century. So why did it disappear? It wasn't biology that changed, it was the world. With the rise of gas lighting and eventually electric bulbs, our cities grew brighter and busier. Work shifted later. Social life pushed into the evenings. The concept of one long night's sleep became a cultural goal, linked to productivity, not natural rhythm. But for centuries before that, sleep was fluid, flexible, intertwined with ritual, belief, and often, community. And we'll explore all of it tonight. From ancient bedtime herbs used by the Greeks and Romans, to medieval prayers designed to protect you while you slept, to the strange shared sleep customs of peasants and aristocrats alike. All real, all human, and all largely forgotten. But not tonight. Tonight, we remember. So let's go deeper into this idea of segmented sleep, because it truly changes how we think about rest and what it meant to the people who came before us. Imagine a world before electricity. No glowing phones. Number 10 p.m. movies. No bright lamps to chase away the night. After the sun set, darkness came quickly. In most rural villages, it was absolute. Even city streets might be lit by a handful of torches or lanterns, but for the average person, the night was quiet and long. With that kind of darkness, it made sense to go to bed earlier, often just after supper. People would fall asleep within an hour or two of sunset, which, depending on the season, could be anywhere from 6 to 8 p.m. That was the first sleep. Then, something curious would happen. Around midnight or a little after, they'd wake naturally. Not in a panic. Not groggy. Just awake. And they'd stay that way for maybe 1 to 2 hours. This period was sometimes called the watch. So, what did people do during this watch? Surprisingly, it wasn't wasted time. It was actually quiet, meaningful time. Some used it for prayer or meditation. In fact, many religious texts from the period encourage prayer in the waking hours of the night. It was believed to be a sacred window when the world was still and the mind was clear. Others might sit by the hearth, add logs to the fire, sip a warm drink, usually an herbal infusion like chamomile, valerian, or sleepy root, brews passed down through families. In some cases, couples used this time for intimacy. Midwives and even medical manuals from the 16th and 17th centuries mention this as a favorable time for conception, believed to be spiritually quiet and physically ideal. People might even chat with others in the household. In communal or rural homes, waking during the night wasn't strange, it was shared. Some would step outside, tend to livestock, or simply observe the stars. The watch was part of life, not a disruption to it. Then, after an hour or so of this soft wakefulness, people would naturally drift back into second sleep, which often lasted until dawn. And here's the most fascinating part: this wasn't just a Western European thing. Evidence of segmented sleep appears across cultures. In West Africa, nighttime rituals often included a pause in sleep for storytelling or reflection. In pre-industrial Japan, it was common for monks and ascetics to sleep in intervals, broken by chanting or tea. And in some parts of the Middle East, especially during certain seasons or religious observances, people structured their nights around spiritual or practical breaks in sleep. So why does this matter? Because in our modern world, waking up in the middle of the night is often treated like a problem. A failure of our bodies. Something to be fixed with melatonin or scrolled through until we fall back asleep. But historically, that wakefulness was natural and even cherished. It makes you wonder, have we lost something by forcing ourselves into a single block of sleep? Was that quiet hour in the middle of the night actually meant for something more? It's not about going backward. But maybe it's about remembering. Remembering that sleep hasn't always been just rest, it's been ritual. It's been sacred. It's been human. Next, we'll look at the specific herbs and remedies people used across cultures to prepare the body and spirit for sleep. Some are still with us. Others have been forgotten until now. Let's step now into the quiet world of sleep herbs, the natural remedies our ancestors trusted to lull the body and mind into rest. Long before pharmaceutical sleep aids and synthetic pills, people turned to the earth. To leaves. To roots. To smoke. And to ritual. What's most surprising is how many of these remedies still show up in modern wellness shelves, though often without the context or ceremony they once held. Take valerian root, for example. Valerian has been used for over 2,000 years, dating back at least to the times of ancient Greece and Rome. The Greek physician Hippocrates described its calming effects, and later, the Roman doctor Galen prescribed it for insomnia. Valerian was usually dried and steeped into a bitter, earthy tea. Sometimes it was added to sachets or tucked beneath pillows. The scent is strong, even pungent, but those who used it believed it helped quiet a racing mind and relaxed the muscles. Interestingly, modern studies suggest valerian may increase GABA levels in the brain, a neurotransmitter that promotes calm. So even now, science is catching up with ancient intuition. Another powerful herb was mugwort. Mugwort isn't just a sleep aid, it was also used as a dream enhancer. In medieval Europe, mugwort was often associated with prophetic or lucid dreaming. People believed that placing it under your pillow could lead to clearer visions in the dream world. It was also burned like incense, or bundled into protective charms hung above the bed. Its use wasn't limited to Europe, either. In Korean and Japanese traditions, mugwort has long been used in a practice called moxibustion, a kind of herbal heat therapy where mugwort is burned near the skin to promote circulation and relaxation. Next on the list, chamomile. You probably know this one. Chamomile is still widely used today as a gentle tea to wind down. But for ancient Egyptians, it was more than just a bedtime drink. It was sacred. Chamomile was associated with the sun god Ra, and used in both healing and spiritual ceremonies. Its calming scent was believed to ease not just the body, but also grief and anxiety, two emotions known to interfere with sleep. In Native American medicine, other plants like passionflower, hops, and skullcap were used to encourage deep sleep or relieve nervous tension. Each was chosen carefully, based not just on effect, but on energy. Some were thought to cool the body, others to ground the mind. What's important to understand is that these herbs were rarely used in isolation. They were part of a larger ritual. A warm herbal drink might be sipped slowly by firelight. The act of preparing it, the grinding, the steeping, the scent, was a form of transition. A signal to the body that night had come. That it was safe to let go. In some traditions, herbs were burned instead of brewed. Like lavender, which was tossed into hearth fires or oil lamps to scent a room. Or frankincense and myrrh, used in both Middle Eastern and Christian traditions to purify the air and calm the spirit before rest. We often think of ancient medicine as crude or primitive. But when you really look closely, you see a delicate understanding of how the body responds to rhythm, scent, and warmth. They didn't just knock themselves out with a sedative. They prepared themselves for rest, inside and out. So now, I'll ask you something. Do you have a ritual before bed? A scent, a sound, a drink, a practice? Maybe we've lost the herbs. But perhaps we can bring back the slowness. The intention. The space between day and sleep. Next, we'll explore how prayers, charms, and ancient bedtime spells were used, not just to help people sleep, but to protect them from what lurked in the dark. In the stillness of ancient nights, rest wasn't just about comfort, it was also about safety. Long before the modern idea of sleep hygiene or locking a door and switching off a light, people relied on something older. Something spiritual. They turned to prayers, charms, and what we might call bedtime spells. In medieval Europe, it was common to recite specific prayers before lying down, not only as a devotion, but as a kind of protection. The night, after all, was filled with unknowns. Illness could strike suddenly. Spirits, both imagined and deeply believed in, were thought to wander after dark. And in the absence of scientific explanation, the line between the physical and the supernatural was thin. One of the most widely used prayers was simple: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. It was repeated softly, often by children, and followed by making the sign of the cross over the pillow. The idea was to call on the saints to guard the sleeper until morning. Beyond prayers, there were physical objects involved: bedside charms, amulets, and written verses. Some people would sleep with small pieces of parchment sewn into their nightclothes, especially ones inscribed with Bible verses or sacred symbols. In ancient Rome, there are records of bedtime incantations, small chants or spoken formulas intended to ward off bad dreams or evil omens. Some were whispered aloud, others written on wax tablets or small papyrus scrolls and placed near the bed. A Roman might place a figurine of Somnus, the god of sleep, by the headboard. Or burn herbs like laurel or juniper to clear negative energy. This wasn't just superstition, it was ritual. And rituals helped the body feel safe enough to rest. In many parts of early Christianity, people were taught that nighttime was the devil's playground. Sleep left the body vulnerable to temptation. So believers were encouraged to sleep with the word, meaning with scripture close, or even memorized. Some monks would wake in the middle of the night, not for restlessness, but to chant psalms as part of their sacred rhythm. Further east, in Byzantine and Coptic traditions, protective symbols like the evil eye were etched into walls near the bed or worn as pendants at night. Even if the theology varied, the impulse was universal: protect the dreamer. Guard the unconscious. In the Jewish tradition, the bedtime Shema is still recited by many observant families. It's not just a prayer. It's a closing of the day, a shield of words meant to offer peace through the night. Part of the prayer says, "Into your hand I entrust my spirit, you will redeem me, Lord, God of truth." Across these cultures, across time, the intention was clear: sleep wasn't a time to surrender blindly, it was a passage. One that called for preparation, not only of the body, but of the soul. Even in pre-Islamic Arabia, there were oral blessings meant to keep away desert spirits believed to torment travelers at night. Certain stones or natural objects were placed beneath the sleeping mat to draw away nightmares or intrusive thoughts. When we think of rest today, it's easy to assume it's just physical. But historically, it was deeply spiritual, something to be safeguarded. There's something deeply human in that. Not fear, but care. A belief that sleep was a vulnerable state, and that it deserved intention, through words, symbols, or the soft whisper of a verse repeated in the dark. Among the rituals that shaped nighttime, few were as universal, or as quietly intimate, as the bed itself. Today, we think of the bed as a private space. A retreat. But in the past, the act of sleeping was often a shared experience, not just with family, but sometimes even with strangers. In medieval Europe, the typical peasant home might have only 1 or 2 beds for an entire household. It wasn't unusual for several family members to sleep together under the same blanket, especially in colder climates. Parents, children, even elderly relatives all lay side by side. The warmth of bodies was the most reliable heating method, and privacy was a luxury few could afford. But even among the wealthier classes, the idea of bed sharing was surprisingly common. In taverns and inns, travelers who didn't know one another would often be assigned to the same bed for the night. It wasn't considered improper, it was practical. Beds were large, and the night was long. This arrangement, known as sleeping double, was sometimes even used to build social or business relationships. In some cultures, sharing a bed symbolized trust. In others, it was simply accepted necessity. The design of beds also reveals how differently sleep was approached. In parts of Eastern Europe and the British Isles, box beds were common, small wooden enclosures with sliding doors or curtains. These were built directly into the walls, providing both warmth and a sense of enclosure. People felt protected inside them, like sleeping in a wooden womb. In China, canopy beds were used not just for elegance, but for insulation. The drapes held in heat and kept out insects. Some beds even had built-in drawers or altars at the head, further blending sleep and ritual. Among indigenous peoples of the Americas, bedding varied by environment. In some regions, hammocks were used to keep sleepers above the ground, away from insects and dampness. In others, woven mats were laid close to communal fires. But regardless of the materials, what was shared across cultures was the notion that sleep was communal, not isolated. Even the architecture of homes reflected this. Rooms weren't divided into individualized bedrooms like today. Instead, sleeping areas were multi-use spaces, where people ate, talked, worked, and eventually lay down. The boundary between waking and sleeping life was soft, fluid. And while some of us might shudder at the idea of sleeping beside others every night, it served an important function: it fostered connection. Stories were shared in the dark. Children listened to the breathing of their parents. Partners whispered before drifting off. There was comfort in closeness. But this doesn't mean rest was chaotic. In fact, many families had unspoken rituals for settling in. A specific side of the bed for the elders. A particular blanket folded just so. A last look at the hearth before lying down. The night held its own rhythm, shaped by touch, breath, and presence. Today, many of us sleep alone. Or if not alone, in silence. The bed has become personal territory. And while that has its own comforts, there's something tender in the way earlier generations embraced togetherness, not just by necessity, but by custom. The idea that sleep could be both vulnerable and shared might feel foreign to us now. But for most of human history, it was the norm. Not something feared. Something trusted. And in that trust, there was a different kind of peace. While the physical arrangements of sleep varied across cultures, one thing remained consistent. The rhythm of sleep followed the rhythm of nature. Long before alarm clocks or rigid schedules, people relied on cues from the world around them to guide when they should rest and when they should rise. Sunset signaled more than the end of the day. It was the first invitation to begin letting go. In many regions, especially those closer to the equator where day and night lengths stay fairly consistent, life naturally aligned itself with the sun's movements. Meals, prayer, and evening tasks were finished before darkness settled in, and soon after, people found their way to rest. This wasn't just practical, it was biological. The body's natural production of melatonin, the hormone that helps regulate sleep, is influenced by light. When darkness falls, melatonin rises. Without artificial lighting to interfere, people were more attuned to this shift, easing into sleep with less resistance. In colder climates or during winter months, when nights stretched longer, sleep patterns became even more flexible. People might lie down earlier, sleep in longer intervals, or spend more time in bed simply to conserve warmth. And yet, in places where the night felt harsher, long, dark, and sometimes frightening, sleep rituals became more elaborate. This wasn't just about herbs or prayers. It was about creating a sense of safety through rhythm. In parts of Scandinavia, for instance, lullabies were passed down not just to soothe children, but to ward off the night spirits. These melodies, often sung softly by firelight, acted as protective spells. The repetition, the warmth of a familiar voice, the closeness of family, all worked together to ease the mind into sleep. Even in West African traditions, rhythmic drumming and chanting were used in the evenings, not for celebration, but for calming. The steady beat mirrored the body's natural rhythms, offering a kind of meditative transition into rest. It's worth noticing how different this is from our modern relationship with nighttime. Today, we resist it. Push it back. Fill it with distractions. But for most of history, darkness was not something to conquer. It was something to move with. Sleep wasn't a disruption to productivity, it was part of life's natural flow. And when people did awaken during the night, as they often did during the segmented sleep model, they weren't alarmed. There was no panic, no need to fix it. It was simply another phase. A gentle pause before returning to dreams. That pause, the watch between sleeps, became a kind of sacred time. Some used it for prayer. Others for thought. A few simply sat in the dark and stared into the glowing embers of a fire. What's striking is how often people reported feeling peace during these hours. Writings from the 16th and 17th centuries describe the middle of the night as a time of clarity. Thoughts felt more pure. Worries quieter. The world, wrapped in silence, allowed the mind to wander without interruption. That wandering wasn't always productive in the way we might define it today. But it was meaningful. Sometimes, people remembered dreams. Or wrote them down. Some even believed that the time between first and second sleep was ideal for interpreting those dreams. The line between the waking world and the spiritual one was believed to be thin, and this pause, this quiet space between two rests, was where insight could pass through. There's something poetic about that. Something worth remembering, even now. That sleep was once a conversation between the world and the body. Not a fight, not a chore, but a rhythm. A dance with night. That natural rhythm. Of easing into sleep, waking gently in the night, and returning again, wasn't unique to Europe or Africa. In ancient China, sleep was deeply connected to both the body and the wider cosmos. It was more than rest. It was an act of balance. Traditional Chinese medicine taught that the body followed the same cycles as the universe. The concept of qi, the life force or vital energy, moved through the body in time with nature's rhythms. Sleep was essential to maintaining that flow. The night was governed by the yin force, cool, dark, inward, and the body was believed to restore itself most deeply when aligned with this quiet energy. Staying up too late or fighting sleep was thought to disrupt the harmony of the organs and leave the body vulnerable. There were even specific times during the night when different organs were believed to be most active in healing. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., for example, the liver was thought to begin its cleansing work. Sleep during this time wasn't just helpful, it was essential for health. People were encouraged to be asleep by then, to allow the liver to work without disturbance. This belief shaped everything from meal times to nightly routines. Heavy food wasn't eaten late, because digestion would disturb the liver's rest. Emotional stress was discouraged in the evenings, since anger or worry were thought to block the flow of qi. To promote peaceful sleep, traditional healers recommended specific teas. Like those made from jujube seeds, lotus root, or swanzao ren, a sour date known for its calming effects. These ingredients weren't chosen randomly, they were part of a deep system of observation and practice. And it wasn't just about herbs. The bedroom itself was treated like a sacred space. Beds were positioned based on feng shui principles, ideally not directly facing the door, and never beneath exposed beams, which were thought to create pressure on the sleeper's energy. The room was kept cool, uncluttered, and dark. Even the material of the bedding mattered. Natural fibers were preferred, nothing that would trap heat or static energy. It's remarkable how much intention went into these choices. Nothing was done for aesthetics alone. Every detail was aimed at creating a restful environment, one that worked with the body, not against it. Even the act of waking in the night was framed differently. It wasn't seen as a failure or a disorder. If someone rose during the heart hours, between 11 a.m. and 1 a.m., or 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., they might reflect on whether something emotional was unresolved. The body and mind weren't separate. A restless night was often a message, not a malfunction. This kind of thinking isn't limited to the past. Even now, in parts of East Asia, bedtime is approached with this same reverence. It's not just getting sleep, it's restoring harmony. And in that, there's something gentle. A recognition that rest is a form of healing, not just recovery. Compare that to how modern life often treats sleep as a deadline, a negotiation, or worse, a weakness. You start to see just how much has changed. But perhaps some of it can return. A cup of something warm. A quiet room. A moment to sit before lying down. A chance to let the day go without a fight. It doesn't require superstition. Just space. Just care. Across the ocean, in the Americas, sleep held its own layers of tradition. Deeply rooted in nature, story, and seasonal rhythm. Among many indigenous cultures, sleep was more than a biological function. It was a time when the spirit traveled. The Ojibwe, for instance, believed dreams were messages, sometimes warnings, sometimes lessons, and other times visions meant to guide important decisions. Before sleep, elders would share stories that weren't just for entertainment, they were anchors. They helped the mind ease into a state where dreams could speak more clearly. These bedtime stories, often told in a soft, rhythmic cadence, created a natural transition from the waking world to the dreaming one. The words weren't rushed. The tone was low. The fire would crackle beside them, and as the flames settled, so did the thoughts. This wasn't just for children. Adults valued these stories too, especially in the winter months when days were short and nights long. Sleep became a time not only for rest, but for spiritual insight. The Inuit of the Arctic had their own ideas about dreams. Some believed that the soul could leave the body during sleep, traveling to distant places or even other realms. Because of this, great care was taken before bedtime. People avoided speaking certain words, avoided emotional conflict, and practiced rituals meant to protect the sleeping spirit. This view wasn't frightening, it was accepted. Sleep was a time of movement, of reaching beyond. What one saw or felt in dreams could affect the next day, even the next season. In Andean cultures, especially among the Quechua and Aymara peoples, sleep was deeply linked to the land. They understood the effect of altitude, of cold, of light, and how those things changed the way people rested. Thick wool blankets, hot herbal infusions made from coca leaves, and shared body heat were all part of sleep life in the high mountains. Even among the Maya, who built sophisticated cities across Central America, sleep was associated with the gods. The god of dreams, sometimes depicted as a reclining figure with closed eyes and smoke rising from his mouth, was seen as a powerful force. Sleep was an opportunity to connect with these higher powers, if one entered it with the right state of mind. It's striking how often these cultures emphasized not just rest, but intention. In the modern world, we often collapse into bed, minds racing, screens still glowing. But for most of history, people eased into sleep gradually. They told stories, burned herbs, sang songs, prayed, spoke less, thought more. They believed sleep was a journey, not just for the body, but for the spirit. And they acted accordingly. One doesn't have to believe in dream gods or wandering souls to appreciate what these traditions offer. At their heart, they remind us that the way we fall asleep matters. The lead up. The mindset. The rhythm. There's a kind of gentleness in that idea. A sense that sleep is not the absence of activity, but the presence of something subtle. Something worth honoring. Tonight, we may not gather around a fire. We may not share a bed with our elders or chant prayers into the rafters. But we can still pause. We can still listen to quiet. We can still choose to enter sleep like our ancestors did. With intention, with stillness, and with trust. Even in ancient cities, where the hum of life never quite ceased, sleep remained a deeply personal, yet socially shaped ritual. In places like Athens, Rome, and Alexandria, the way people slept reflected not just their biology, but their class, their beliefs, and the pulse of urban life. In ancient Rome, for instance, sleep was divided not just by time, but by social status. The wealthier elite often had private rooms, sometimes separate from the rest of the household, decorated with tapestries, incense burners, and reclining couches. But for the working class, sleep was far more communal and improvisational. Many Romans lived in insulae, multi-story apartment buildings made from stone and timber. These structures were noisy, cramped, and flammable. Privacy was limited, and so was space. Beds were shared, if they existed at all. Some people slept on straw mats, benches, or directly on the floor. Sleep had to adapt to the noise of the street, the barking of dogs, the clatter of carts, even the sounds of nighttime labor from bakers or guards. But despite the chaos, there was still care put into the act of winding down. Roman writings mention the use of sleep masks made of linen soaked in rose water, or herbal satchels containing lavender, chamomile, or crushed poppy seeds. Wealthy Romans believed that calming the senses with scent and warmth led to more peaceful rest. Philosophers like Seneca and Pliny the Elder also wrote about the importance of the sleep environment. They encouraged readers to keep their chambers dark, quiet, and cool. One common method to cool rooms during summer was to hang damp cloth over windows and allow the evening breeze to pass through it. It wasn't high-tech, but it worked. In ancient Greece, sleep was viewed as a necessary counterpart to reason. Greek physicians like Hippocrates saw sleep as vital to the body's healing cycle. Too much or too little was a problem, balance was the goal. They believed that sleep quality was affected by what one ate, the time of day, and the emotional state before bed. A light supper, taken well before dusk, was often recommended. And bathing, often in warm water, helped prepare the body by lowering internal temperature and calming the nerves. There's evidence that people in both Rome and Greece sometimes used mild opiates or wines infused with herbs to promote sleep. These weren't taken recreationally, but carefully, especially by those who believed that dreams could carry important truths. Dreams, in fact, held great weight in classical life. In both Greek and Roman culture, temples called asclepia served as places of dream healing. The sick or troubled would journey to these sanctuaries, undergo purification rituals, and then sleep in a sacred chamber hoping to receive a healing vision from the gods, particularly Asclepius, the god of medicine. Dreams were then interpreted by priests or healers. If the dream contained a certain symbol or message, it could be used to guide treatment, or even daily decisions. Sleep was not passive, it was a bridge to understanding and health. Even in these bustling, sun-soaked civilizations, the night held space for reflection. And whether in a cramped apartment, a countryside villa, or a temple chamber, people sought more than just rest. They sought peace, clarity, and sometimes even revelation in their sleep. It reminds us that no matter how advanced a society became, or how loud the world outside, there was always something deeply human about preparing for the dark. Something ancient. Something slow. The ancient Egyptians held a unique and layered relationship with sleep, one that blurred the lines between daily rest, religious belief, and the mysteries of death and rebirth. To the Egyptians, sleep was not simply a period of bodily recovery. It was a spiritual journey, often likened to a temporary death. And dreams were more than just figments of the mind, they were considered messages from the gods, or even glimpses into the future. This worldview made the sleep space a sacred one. In wealthier homes, sleep areas were adorned with amulets and inscriptions, often invoking Biz, the dwarf god of sleep, protection, and childbirth. Though comical in appearance, Biz was deeply beloved. His image was carved into headrests and bedposts, placed above sleeping children, and worn as pendants. He was believed to guard sleepers from nightmares, evil spirits, and illness. Another figure closely tied to sleep was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and the moon. Thoth was considered a guide of dreams, a divine translator who could make sense of what the unconscious mind experienced. Priests of Thoth would often keep dream journals and perform rituals to encourage meaningful dreams, especially before major decisions. Sleep rituals in Egypt sometimes included the burning of incense, particularly kaifi, a sacred blend of myrrh, honey, wine, raisins, and more than a dozen other ingredients. Kaifi wasn't just for scent. It was thought to purify the air, open the mind, and calm the nerves before sleep. Plutarch, the Greek historian, once wrote that kaifi was a composition that lulled to sleep and brightened dreams. The Egyptian bed itself was a marvel of design, often elevated off the ground, sometimes curved to support the spine, and paired with a headrest instead of a pillow. These headrests, made of wood or ivory, looked like miniature stools for the neck. While they may seem uncomfortable today, they were believed to protect the sleeper from evil forces entering through the vulnerable head while also preserving elaborate hairstyles. Even more fascinating is how closely sleep and death were linked in Egyptian thought. The word for sleep in the Egyptian language was often used metaphorically for death, and tombs were sometimes designed to look like bedrooms, complete with beds, headrests, and even sleeping poses sculpted into the sarcophagi. This wasn't morbid. It was reverent. To the Egyptians, sleep was a nightly rehearsal for the afterlife, a safe passage into a temporary darkness from which one hoped to awaken renewed. It wasn't just what happened during the night that mattered, it was the intention carried into it. Before sleeping, many Egyptians engaged in quiet prayer or reflection. They might speak aloud to their ancestors or request peaceful dreams. Some even wrote down their fears or worries and placed the papyrus near the bed, trusting that sleep would soften their burden. In temple complexes, certain priests and chosen individuals would enter dream chambers, dark, silent rooms used for incubation, a practice meant to provoke visions. These weren't random naps. They were rituals. A deliberate descent into unconsciousness, guided by chants, scent, and sacred architecture. All of this points to one thing. In ancient Egypt, sleep was respected. It was not rushed, ignored, or taken for granted. It was seen as an essential part of spiritual health, just as important as waking action. In a world where the stars told time and gods watched over every part of life, the hours spent sleeping were not hours lost. They were sacred hours, full of possibility, full of meaning, and full of care. In the Islamic world, especially during the Golden Age of Islam between the 8th and 13th centuries, sleep was not just viewed through a medical or physical lens, it was understood as an integrated part of a well-balanced, spiritual life. Philosophers, scientists, and spiritual leaders alike paid careful attention to how, when, and why people slept. Guidance on sleep can be found in both religious texts and medical treatises. In the Hadith, the sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. There are numerous references to the best sleeping positions, recommended times for rest, and even the etiquette of waking. It was advised, for example, to sleep on the right side, facing the direction of prayer. This posture was believed to promote both humility and good digestion. Sleep was considered a gift from God, a time when the soul partially departed the body, traveling into unseen realms. In this belief, the act of waking each morning was akin to a small resurrection. One particular verse in the Quran says, "It is Allah who takes away the souls at the time of their death and those that do not die during their sleep." This poetic and profound idea gave the night a sacred stillness. Because of this, it was common for people to recite prayers before bed, not only for protection but as a way to submit the self peacefully to God's will. These supplications often included requests for peaceful dreams, forgiveness, and safety through the night. Philosophers and physicians like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, took a more clinical approach in addition to the spiritual one. In his famous work The Canon of Medicine, he described the importance of sleep for digestion, brain clarity, and physical repair. He wrote that sleep helps to digest the materials in the stomach and distribute the nutrients throughout the body. But he also emphasized timing, that sleep taken too early or too late could disrupt the body's balance. He noted that sleeping immediately after eating caused the humors, fluids thought to govern health, to stagnate, while sleep too late in the night disturbed mental clarity the following day. These teachings influenced sleep practices throughout the Muslim world and into Europe via Latin translations. In the cities of Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, where knowledge and architecture flourished, people often designed their homes to encourage good rest. Thick walls and shaded courtyards kept sleeping areas cool. Beds were low and made from natural fibers like cotton or wool. Scented oils, especially rose, sandalwood, and amber, were applied to bedding or burned in lamps to soothe the senses. It was also common for people to take midday naps, known as kailula, a practice still seen in many Arab cultures today. These short naps were considered restorative, not lazy, and were encouraged by both doctors and religious scholars. By balancing night sleep with a brief period of rest during the hottest hours of the day, people maintained energy without disrupting nighttime rhythms. Beyond the practical elements, dream interpretation played a strong role in Islamic culture. Scholars like Ibn Sirin compiled books of dream meanings, and it wasn't uncommon for people to discuss their dreams with family or scholars to uncover divine guidance. What stands out in all of this is how integrated sleep was in daily life. Mind, body, and spirit. There was no rush to conquer the night or squeeze more work into the late hours. Instead, nightfall was seen as a time for spiritual reconnection, for surrender, and for healing. It paints a picture of a world where sleep was woven into the day with intention, an opportunity to be both still and renewed, to let go while trusting that the morning would come. As we move further east, the traditions surrounding sleep in ancient Japan offer yet another beautifully unique lens. One grounded in simplicity, ritual, and deep respect for nature and the body's quiet needs. In traditional Japanese culture, sleep was closely aligned with Zen principles, ideas of mindfulness, balance, and impermanence. The sleep environment reflected this. Instead of large, permanent beds, people slept on futons, thin, foldable mats laid directly on tatami flooring. Each morning, the bedding was folded away and stored. This not only saved space, especially in smaller homes, but also created a clear boundary between waking life and rest. The futon itself offered more than practicality. Sleeping close to the ground was believed to improve posture and support a deeper, undisturbed sleep. The simplicity of the materials, natural cotton, straw matting, and open airflow, helped regulate body temperature and create a sensory connection to the earth beneath. The sleep setting was carefully curated. Tatami rooms were typically uncluttered and softly lit, if at all. The idea was to let the room breathe. There was no need for excess. Minimalism wasn't aesthetic alone, it was intentional. A calm, open space supported a calm, open mind. Evening rituals were subtle but meaningful. Baths were a central part of nightly routine, especially the ofuro, a deep, wooden soaking tub filled with hot water. Bathing was not rushed. It was done slowly, in silence, often with herbs or citrus added to the water depending on the season. The warmth relaxed muscles, cleared the mind, and marked the transition into sleep. After the bath, families might gather for tea, not caffeine-rich varieties, but calming herbal blends like yomugi, Japanese mugwort, or roasted barley tea. These drinks were earthy and grounding, served warm, without sugar, in small cups meant to be sipped slowly. It was not a moment for chatter. It was for settling. The influence of Shinto, Japan's indigenous belief system, can also be seen in sleep habits. Shinto emphasizes harmony with nature, cleanliness, and the sacredness of space. Before sleep, it wasn't uncommon for people to offer a quiet bow to a household altar, acknowledge ancestors, or express simple gratitude. These gestures weren't always formal. Often, they were deeply personal, a breath, a nod, a pause. And then there were dreams. In Japanese folklore, dreams were seen as pathways, sometimes to truth, sometimes to trickery. Certain symbols, such as Mount Fuji, a hawk, or an eggplant appearing in a dream on the first night of the new year, were thought to be extremely lucky. These were called Hatsuyume dreams. People would even sleep facing a certain direction or use symbolic objects near the pillow to encourage positive visions. Dreams could also carry warnings. Spirits known as yurei, restless or unsettled souls, were sometimes said to visit sleepers in their dreams. For protection, people might place charms or talismans, known as omamori, near their bedding. Others used carved netseki, incense, or amulets purchased from temples. Yet, even with these beliefs, fear wasn't the dominant emotion. The night was respected, not avoided. There was no pressure to chase sleep, no obsession with sleep aids or strict routines. Instead, sleep was entered gently, naturally, and with reverence. The night was a quiet companion. Today, many of these practices live on in subtle ways. The value of a cool, uncluttered room. The soothing power of warm water. The ritual of tea. These habits continue to support restful sleep, not through force, but through presence. And in remembering them, perhaps we find an invitation. Not to replicate exactly, but to reconnect to the idea that sleep is more than a shut-off. It's a return to something soft, necessary, and deeply human. While traditions vary from culture to culture, a theme that appears again and again is the idea that herbs and natural remedies are not just supplements, but companions in sleep. Across continents and centuries, people turn to the natural world to ease the body and calm the mind. One of the most enduring examples is lavender. Used widely in ancient Greece and Rome, it was prized not only for its soothing fragrance but also for its effect on restlessness. Romans often placed sprigs of lavender under pillows, in bathwater, or burned its dried flowers near the bed. Its name comes from the Latin word lavare, meaning to wash, which reflects its use in both bathing and cleansing rituals before bed. Another ancient favorite was chamomile. In Egypt, it was used in sacred rituals and medicinal brews. Physicians in the ancient world believed chamomile could soothe anxiety, reduce inflammation, and ease people into sleep. Crushed flowers were infused into tea or pressed into compresses laid gently across the forehead. In India, the holistic science of Ayurveda approached sleep as a key pillar of health, equally important as food or breath. According to Ayurvedic teachings, sleep is governed by tamas, the energy of stillness and grounding. When this energy was disturbed by worry, poor diet, or physical imbalance, sleep would suffer. To restore balance, Ayurvedic practitioners recommended evening routines involving ashwagandha, a root that calms the nervous system, and brahmi, an herb believed to sharpen mental clarity while promoting peace. These were often steeped in warm milk or ghee and taken just before lying down. Sleep wasn't something to be achieved, but something to be invited. In medieval Europe, healers gathered herbs under the light of the moon, believing that night-chosen plants held more potent energy. Sleep pillows were crafted from blends of dried hops, rose petals, and mugwort. These were sewn into sachets and placed near the head to quiet dreams or protect against nightmares. In colder regions, valerian root became a trusted ally. Though its scent was strong and earthy, almost unpleasant, it was revered for its powerful sedative properties. Moving to South America, indigenous groups in the Amazon basin used herbs like passion flower and guava leaves. These were boiled into teas that cooled the body and prepared it for rest. They didn't have scientific names for what they used, they had stories. Plants weren't just ingredients. They were ancestors, allies, teachers. Even in the high Andes, where the air was thin and nights cold, people used coca leaves, not for stimulation at bedtime, but in tiny, ritual doses to ease aches and quiet the mind before sleep. The warmth of coca tea was less about effect and more about ritual. Sipping slowly, wrapping in blankets, and letting the body settle. In East Asia, lotus flowers, jujube seeds, and licorice root were all part of the herbal tradition for calming the spirit. These herbs weren't meant to knock someone out, they were meant to gently carry the sleeper into rest. What connects all of these traditions is not just the herbs themselves, but the care with which they were chosen, prepared, and used. The act of making tea. The scent of herbs in a linen bag. The memory of someone long ago doing the same, with the same hopes for peace. In a world before sleep apps and supplements, nature was enough. And sometimes, even now, it still is. The role of ritual in preparing for sleep can't be overstated. Across cultures and time periods, bedtime wasn't just something that happened at the end of the day. It was something that people prepared for with rhythm, with meaning, and often with a kind of reverence. In many traditions, this began with evening prayers or quiet recitations. Whether whispered to deities, ancestors, or simply spoken into the silence, these words served as a way to mark the end of the waking world and to enter sleep with a clean heart and a settled mind. Among Jewish communities, the Shema, a central prayer, was, and still is, recited before bed. It's a declaration of faith, but also of trust. To say it at night is to place oneself in divine care, to release control, and to surrender to the vulnerability of sleep. Similarly, in Christian monasteries, nighttime prayer, known as Compline, closed the day with candles, chant, and moments of deep silence. These rituals were not just religious obligations. They were psychological transitions. A way to quiet the mind. A final act of order before slipping into the unknown space of dreams. In Hindu households, sleep was traditionally preceded by a light offering or puja. A small flame would be lit before an altar, often containing images of gods, flowers, or family relics. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. It was simply a pause. A signal to the body and soul, the day is done, and now rest begins. Even outside formal religion, these kinds of wind-down rituals were everywhere. In the Victorian era, people followed very structured nighttime routines. Washing with lavender water, brushing hair exactly 100 times, reading aloud to children or journaling by lamplight. It wasn't about luxury. It was about consistency. About giving the body signals that it was safe to let go. Children in particular were guided into sleep with special care. Around the world, lullabies have been used not just to entertain, but to soothe. Some lullabies were soft and sweet, filled with images of stars, cradles, and dreams. Others, surprisingly, were filled with warnings and strange symbolism. Not to frighten, but to prepare the child's subconscious for a world full of mystery. In Scotland, lullabies sometimes included references to fae or spirits that watched over the child while they slept. In West Africa, drum rhythms and humming patterns passed down for generations were used to help infants match their breathing to the slow, steady pulse of the night. And in Japan, mothers would whisper rhythmic songs called komori-uta, repeating phrases with such softness they became almost like a heartbeat. Adults, too, weren't exempt from rhythm. The quiet rituals of brushing hair, lighting candles, or folding linens weren't random. They were cues, just like the dimming of natural light. Over time, the repetition of these small acts became an unconscious path to sleep. And even where no formal prayers were spoken, people often followed the same sequence of motions, night after night. The same cup placed in the same spot. The same blanket folded just so. The same quiet look out the window at the moon. It wasn't magic. But it worked like magic. Because it wasn't about perfection. It was about slowing down. About treating the hour before sleep as something sacred, not something to rush through, but something to feel. In today's world, we often lose this. We leap from screen to pillow. We expect the mind to shut down on command. But the ancestors knew something. That sleep is a place we journey to, and every journey begins with a step. If we think of sleep as a destination, then what guides us there isn't just routine or rest, it's often sound. For much of human history, nighttime wasn't silent in the way we imagine it today. Instead, people were surrounded by a soft chorus of natural and intentional sounds that helped shape the mood of nightfall. In rural communities, sleep came alongside the hum of insects, the soft hoot of an owl, or the rhythmic croak of frogs. These weren't disturbances, they were markers. Reassurances that the world outside was turning as it should. Familiar, patterned sounds provided comfort in the dark. But humans also created sounds specifically meant to calm. In Tibetan and Himalayan traditions, the use of singing bowls was central to preparing both the mind and body for meditation and sleep. These bowls, struck or rubbed with a wooden mallet, produce long, resonant tones that vibrate through a space, and, as many believe, through the body. The sound isn't just heard. It's felt. Practitioners used these vibrations to slow their breathing, release tension, and prepare for deep states of rest. The tones don't rise and fall like music. They stretch and soften, long, sustained waves that mimic the slowing of thought. In ancient China, wind chimes were often hung near windows and entryways, not only to invite luck, but also to soothe the soul. Made from bamboo, bone, or metal, their tones varied depending on the material. The gentle clinking of chimes in the breeze created a natural lullaby, often associated with cleansing energy and peaceful sleep. Sound was also central in Middle Eastern and North African traditions. In some Sufi practices, repetitive chanting, known as dhikr, was used not only for spiritual focus but also to bring the practitioner into a deeply relaxed state. The repetition of divine names, whispered or sung in low voices, functioned like a mantra. It helped synchronize breath and thought, drawing the mind away from distraction and towards stillness. Even in Western Europe, lullabies and night music were part of everyday life. In medieval households, nurses and mothers sang in a soft minor key, often repeating phrases over and over until the child, or sometimes the adult, drifted into sleep. These weren't cheerful melodies. They were deep and slow, rooted in emotion. And because they were passed down orally, they often carried centuries of meaning. Some cultures even use storytelling as a form of sonic rest. In Arctic and subarctic communities, where darkness could last for months, elders would tell stories late into the night. Their voices didn't rise or fall with drama. They stayed low, consistent, and gentle. Deliberately paced to slow the listener's heart rate. The goal wasn't just to entertain. It was to wrap the listener in rhythm. It's not hard to see why this worked. The brain responds to repetition and pattern. When we hear consistent, predictable sounds, the mind begins to relax. Heart rate slows. Muscles loosen. The body prepares for rest. Modern sleep science has only confirmed what ancient people already knew: sound can guide us inward. It doesn't have to be music. Sometimes, the steady crackle of a fire, the slow fall of rain, or the quiet hum of a voice is all it takes. In a way, sleep is not entered in silence, it's entered in softness. And sound, when chosen with care, becomes the path. Even today, the right sound, familiar, slow, and gentle, can carry us across the threshold from wakefulness into dreams. Just as sound and ritual shaped the path to sleep, so too did light, or the absence of it. Before electricity, the rhythms of sleep were tied closely to the natural cycle of the sun and moon. But people didn't just sleep when it got dark. They engaged with light, firelight, lamplight, moonlight, in very specific, deliberate ways. In medieval Europe, for instance, the day began at sunrise and ended not long after sunset. Artificial light was expensive and limited. Candles were made from beeswax or tallow, and oil lamps required fuel that many couldn't afford to burn all night. So, people used what little light they had wisely, often choosing to go to bed not long after dusk. But here's the fascinating part: people didn't sleep in one continuous block. Historical records, journals, and even medical texts from the Middle Ages mention a pattern called segmented sleep. People would go to bed shortly after nightfall, sleep for a few hours, and then wake around midnight. This period of wakefulness, called the watch, would last for 1 to 2 hours. After that, they would return to bed for what they called the second sleep. During the watch, the house would remain mostly dark. A small fire or a candle might stay lit, but often people moved through this time slowly and intentionally. Some used the quiet hours to pray, meditate, or write in journals. Others might sit by the hearth, speak softly with loved ones, or simply lie in bed and reflect. It wasn't considered insomnia. It was normal. In fact, doctors from the time even recommended this midnight pause as healthy. The mind was thought to be clearer during the watch, and dreams from the first sleep could be reflected upon during that time. It was a moment of calm awareness, between the deep unconsciousness of early night and the practical duties of dawn. The return to second sleep often came naturally. As the fire dimmed and the body cooled, sleep would rise again, carrying the sleeper into morning. Outside the home, moonlight was seen as both mysterious and influential. In many cultures, people believed the moon affected sleep quality. Farmers observed that animals behaved differently under a full moon, and some believed that too much moonlight entering the bedroom could disrupt dreams or even invite restlessness. In some places, windows were covered not just to block cold, but to keep unwanted moonlight out. Conversely, in certain religious traditions, sleeping in view of the moon was seen as a blessing, linking the sleeper to divine rhythms. And across many ancient civilizations, firelight wasn't just a practical tool. It was the anchor of night. People would gather around it not only for warmth, but to wind down slowly. There was something about the flicker of flame that naturally matched the slow descent into sleep, an ever-changing, rhythmic glow that was neither too dark nor too bright. Today, we understand that light, especially blue light from screens, can delay the release of melatonin, the body's natural sleep hormone. But our ancestors didn't need studies to tell them that harsh light at night disturbed rest. They knew, intuitively, that dimming the lights was part of calling the body to rest. And perhaps there's a quiet wisdom in returning to that practice, letting the world grow darker slowly, signaling to the mind and body that it's safe to let go. In darkness, sleep isn't feared. It's welcomed. As we explore the sleep traditions of the past, one of the most fascinating, and often overlooked, practices is how people managed shared sleeping spaces. For much of human history, sleep was a communal act. The idea of sleeping alone in a private bedroom is a relatively modern invention, mostly shaped by wealth, space, and cultural shifts in the last few centuries. In ancient homes, whether huts, yurts, longhouses, or stone cottages, entire families often slept in the same room, sometimes even in the same bed. This wasn't just out of necessity. It was also about warmth, safety, and emotional closeness. In northern climates, especially during harsh winters, sleeping together meant survival. A single hearth might be the only source of heat, and sleeping in a group preserved body warmth. Infants, elders, and adults huddled close, not just for comfort, but for life. Among the Vikings, communal sleeping was common in longhouses where extended families, servants, and even animals sometimes shared the same space. Wooden platforms covered with fur pelts lined the walls. There was little privacy, but the shared environment reinforced community bonds. Storytelling, prayers, and sometimes singing happened just before bed, creating a ritual of togetherness. In medieval Europe, even noble households featured shared beds. Royal visitors sometimes slept in the same bed as their host, not out of intimacy, but as a mark of trust and political alliance. Bedchambers were social spaces, not purely private ones. Children often slept with their parents or siblings until they were well into adolescence. Bedtime became a time for shared stories, quiet chatter, and physical closeness that helped ease fears and reinforce relationships. In Japan, traditional families often slept side by side on futons spread across a single tatami room. In the morning, everything was folded and put away, transforming the space for other uses. The family room at night was transformed into a sleep chamber, and in the morning, it returned to life. In nomadic cultures, such as the Mongols, families slept within the round, central space of a ger, or yurt. These spaces were carefully arranged. Sleeping areas positioned based on age, gender, and role within the family. Even as sleep occurred, the structure of the space reinforced cultural values. Sleep wasn't seen as a private escape. It was a shared experience, woven into the larger fabric of daily life. This closeness, of course, came with compromises. Privacy was rare. But emotional safety was rich. Nighttime wasn't silent and separate, it was filled with breath, the shifting of bodies, quiet voices, and the occasional snore. In that closeness, there was a deep sense of belonging. Interestingly, in many of these traditions, fear of the dark was not as pronounced as it is in modern culture. When you sleep with others, you are not alone. The presence of others helped ease fears about spirits, illness, or intruders. It created a sense of security that reached beyond the physical. Today, sleep has become more isolated. Many people sleep in separate rooms, with doors closed, white noise machines on, and blackout curtains drawn. While privacy can be restful, it's worth remembering that for thousands of years, sleep was shared, intimate, and filled with human connection. Perhaps what ancient practices suggest is that rest doesn't always come from silence or solitude, it can also come from being close to those we trust. From the comfort of shared breath, of knowing someone is near, and of letting go together. In the dim quiet of night, when the world slows and distractions fade, the human mind has always turned inward. In many cultures, this inward space, between waking and sleeping, was seen as sacred. It was in these moments that people believed the soul could travel, that truths could be revealed, or that guidance could be received through dreams. Dreams, far from being brushed off as nonsense, were often treated with deep respect. They were thought to be messages, sometimes from ancestors, sometimes from deities, and sometimes from one's own subconscious, though ancient people might not have used that word. Dreams could heal, warn, inspire, or confuse. But rarely were they ignored. In ancient Mesopotamia, dreams were believed to be direct communications from the gods. Kings often had dream interpreters on staff, and some would not make major decisions without consulting their dreams first. Clay tablets from over 4,000 years ago contain dream symbols and meanings, early precursors to the dream dictionaries we sometimes see today. One tablet records a king dreaming of a river overflowing, which his advisors took as a sign of an approaching flood and possible famine. Whether or not the event came to pass, the king adjusted his plans. In this way, dreams became part of policy, of leadership, and of survival. In ancient Egypt, dreams were equally important. Special temples were dedicated to the practice of dream incubation, a ritual in which someone seeking guidance would sleep in a sacred space after performing specific rites. The hope was that during sleep, they would receive a dream revealing a solution to a problem or a sign from a god. Priests acted as interpreters, and dream scrolls were kept and studied. The Greek world carried this tradition forward. At healing temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine, patients would bathe, fast, and pray before sleeping in a sanctuary. These were not hospitals in the modern sense, they were places of spiritual and bodily alignment. The process of dreaming, called incubatio, was seen as part of the healing itself. If one dreamed of a snake coiling around the body, a symbol of Asclepius, it was taken as a good omen. Dreams also held value in Islamic tradition, where they were categorized into three types: true dreams from God, false dreams from the self, and deceptive dreams from disturbing forces. Scholars like Ibn Sirin compiled extensive guides for interpreting dream symbols, and it was common for people to seek advice based on what they saw in sleep. In indigenous cultures throughout the Americas, dreams played central roles in personal and communal life. For many groups, including the Ojibwa and Lakota, dreams were considered spiritual gifts. The vision quest, a rite of passage for young people, often involved fasting and sleeping alone in nature until a guiding dream arrived. Even among everyday people, farmers, weavers, and hunters, dreams were shared and discussed each morning. They might reveal the location of game, the timing of a ceremony, or the emotional needs of a loved one. Unlike modern life, where dreams are often dismissed or forgotten, ancient cultures treated dreams with intentionality. Beds were not just places to rest, they were gateways. And sleep was not just rest, it was a form of listening. To dream was to receive. And whether those dreams were comforting, unsettling, or strange, they were honored. Written down, spoken aloud, interpreted with care. Because to sleep was not to shut off, it was to open. For many ancient cultures, the boundary between the waking world and the dream world was porous, one flowed naturally into the other. And perhaps nowhere was this more vividly expressed than in the way people prepared their bodies for sleep, not just their minds. Before synthetic sleep aids, before alarm clocks and blackout curtains, people relied on a set of physical cues and comforts, simple, sensory tools rooted in nature. And these weren't just about falling asleep faster. They were about aligning the body with the night. One of the most enduring practices was the use of oils and natural scents. In ancient India, warm oil massages, called abhyanga, were a daily ritual for some. Before bed, oils like sesame, coconut, or bringra would be gently rubbed into the scalp and soles of the feet. The warmth, the scent, the pressure, all of it signaled to the body that it was time to slow down. The mind, dulled by stimulation all day, could follow the lead of the body's stillness. In the Mediterranean world, olive oil wasn't just for food. It was rubbed into skin after bathing, sometimes mixed with calming herbs like marjoram or lavender. The oil nourished the body and helped protect against the cooling air of the evening. The act of applying it was slow, mindful, and soothing. Bathing itself, especially in Rome and Greece, was as much a sleep ritual as it was a hygiene practice. In the later hours of the day, people often visited public baths not to socialize, but to relax. Tepid pools, soft lighting from oil lamps, and a gradual return home allowed the nervous system to unwind long before the head hit the pillow. And even in colder regions, people found ways to use heat to signal rest. In Scandinavia, sweat lodges and saunas were used by some communities before sleep. These heated spaces encouraged the body to release tension, open the pores, and prepare for deep, uninterrupted rest. Touch mattered, too. Not just in massage, but in the textures people chose for sleep. In medieval households, bedding was often made from linen, wool, or straw, layered depending on the season. Sheets were aired out during the day and smoothed carefully before bed. Some people kept small warm stones or warmed bricks wrapped in cloth near their feet to take the edge off a cold mattress. The act of reaching for comfort was deeply human and timeless. In China, traditional medicine emphasized balance between the body's energies. Evening routines often included sipping warm teas made from jujube fruit, licorice root, or lotus seeds, each with properties believed to calm the heart or quiet the liver energy, making it easier to drift into natural sleep. But perhaps most fascinating is how people were attuned to the timing of their physical wind down. In most cultures, it wasn't about staying up until collapse. It was about honoring the approach of night and letting the body step into darkness gently. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It was felt. Today, many of us jump straight from stimulation into stillness and wonder why our sleep feels thin. But ancient people understood that the body, when guided patiently, can be its own best medicine. They knew that slowing down the breath, softening the muscles, and tending to small comforts created an invitation to rest. A whispered message to the nervous system, it's okay now. You're safe. Let go. And in that stillness, sleep could enter like a familiar guest. In the still hours of the night, the environment we sleep in becomes more than just a backdrop, it becomes a character in the story of our rest. For most of human history, sleep environments weren't crafted for style, but for function, spirit, and seasonal flow. These spaces told stories about values, beliefs, and what people needed to feel safe enough to surrender to sleep. In many ancient Chinese households, rooms were arranged according to feng shui, the practice of harmonizing human life with the surrounding environment. The bedroom was considered a place of vital energy, and where you placed your bed mattered. It should never face a mirror, for example, which was believed to reflect energy back at the sleeper, creating restlessness. Beds were ideally positioned where the head faced a solid wall, symbolizing protection, with gentle airflow but no direct breeze. The room's colors, lighting, and materials all carried meaning: wood for grounding, soft colors for calm, and curved edges to ease tension. In Egyptian culture, particularly among the upper classes, beds were elevated platforms, often ornately carved and sometimes inlaid with gold or ivory. Linen sheets were used to keep cool in the desert heat, and headrests, rather than pillows, propped up the neck at a careful angle. More than furniture, these beds reflected cosmic order. Sleeping elevated kept the sleeper closer to the realm of the sky gods, and protected from earthly pests. In contrast, nomadic cultures often slept close to the ground, with layered mats, skins, or woolen blankets. But even these were arranged with purpose. Among Bedouin communities, the sleeping area might be set in the corner of a large tent, with soft woven dividers separating rest from the main space. These partitions offered psychological privacy and a sense of sacred enclosure. Patterns on the fabrics, often geometric or symbolic, were believed to offer protection or invite good dreams. Lighting played a subtle, essential role. Before electricity, people slept with soft firelight or oil lamps. In Persian homes, small niches were built into the wall to hold clay lamps, casting gentle amber light across plaster walls. The shadows themselves became soothing. People weren't trying to eliminate darkness, they were learning to live with it. Scent was also part of the sleep environment. In Moroccan households, beds might be sprinkled with dried rose petals, and rooms perfumed with cedarwood or orange blossom water. These were not luxury indulgences. They were part of a sensory ritual that communicated safety, beauty, and calm. Seasonal adjustments were common, too. In colder months, heavier fabrics and insulating straw or fur would be layered into the bedding. In warmer seasons, mosquito nets, breathable linens, or even outdoor sleeping platforms would be used. In tropical regions, people often arranged their sleep around the weather, moving toward shaded, ventilated spaces when the heat was most intense. Even the ceiling or sky above had meaning. In many indigenous cultures, especially among Plains tribes in North America, sleeping under the open sky wasn't unusual. Looking up at stars before drifting into dreams was seen as a connection to ancestors, to time itself. The sky was the ceiling of memory. What all these environments had in common was intention. People paid attention to what surrounded their sleep. They made changes not for aesthetics alone, but to support the body, soothe the senses, and signal that sleep was not an interruption, but a return. A return to softness. A return to quiet. A return to the natural rhythm of things. Throughout time, people didn't just prepare for sleep, they protected it. The hours of night, though quiet, were often seen as vulnerable. Darkness brought with it a sense of mystery, but also the unknown. To sleep was to surrender. And in that surrender, people across cultures developed ways to guard their sleep, both physically and spiritually. In many traditional societies, people believed that the body wasn't the only thing that rested during sleep. The spirit did too, and sometimes, it wandered. This led to the development of protective charms, symbols, and objects meant to keep bad dreams or evil spirits at bay. In Slavic folklore, bundles of garlic were sometimes placed near the bed to keep away malevolent forces. Garlic wasn't just thought to repel illness, it was believed to confuse or ward off unwanted spirits. The scent, the shape, and even the number of cloves mattered. Among the Maasai people of East Africa, red ochre markings on the skin and clothing served as protection, not just during waking hours, but also while sleeping. In many indigenous traditions, red is a color of strength, of life, and of boundary. To sleep marked with red was to sleep under a shield. In South America, many Andean families placed black stones or small talismans under their pillows, often infused with ancestral blessings. These were passed down through generations. Not just for luck, but for protection during dreams. A person's dream life was seen as deeply connected to their spirit world, and not every dream visitor was welcome. One of the best-known protective sleep objects comes from Native American cultures, particularly the Ojibwe people, the dream catcher. Originally made from willow hoops and sinew, dream catchers were hung above sleeping areas, especially for children. The web in the center was designed to catch bad dreams, allowing good ones to slip through the center and fall gently down the feathers. Though widely commercialized now, the original dream catchers were sacred and specific, made by hand, prayed over, and respected. In Japanese homes, small charms known as omamori were sometimes placed in bedrooms to offer protection. These cloth pouches, often purchased from temples or shrines, were sealed and not meant to be opened. Their contents, prayers, blessings, sacred writings, were private. It was the presence, not the details, that mattered. Some cultures also protected sleep through incantations or prayers whispered into the air. In Islamic tradition, certain verses from the Quran are recommended before bed, offering a shield against fear and night terrors. In Christian households, children might be taught to say, "Now I lay me down to sleep," a prayer that, though simple, served as a ritual of protection as well as faith. Even the arrangement of objects in the room played a role. In feng shui, it's considered bad luck to sleep with the soles of your feet pointing toward a door, a position known as the coffin position. Such an arrangement was thought to leave the sleeper exposed. Likewise, mirrors facing the bed were thought to reflect away energy or invite something else in. In rural Europe, iron nails or scissors were sometimes placed under the mattress or tucked into the bed frame. Iron was believed to repel witches and spirits. And while it may sound superstitious now, it's a reminder of how seriously people took the idea of spiritual safety. To them, sleep wasn't just unconsciousness. It was a journey through invisible realms. And so they guarded it, with herbs, with symbols, with prayer, and with intention. Because rest, in a world full of uncertainties, was a precious thing. And protecting it wasn't superstition. It was wisdom. Sleep may seem like a solitary act today, but for much of history, it was woven into communal rhythms, especially in relation to work, religion, and agriculture. The way people slept often depended on what was happening around them: harvest seasons, religious observances, community duties, or even weather patterns. Sleep didn't stand alone, it flowed with life. In agrarian societies, people rose and slept according to the demands of the land. During planting and harvest times, when daylight was critical, communities shifted their sleep schedules to accommodate early morning labor. In parts of rural Europe, villagers might wake long before sunrise, work through the cool morning hours, nap briefly after midday, and then return to the fields until dusk. Evening sleep would come earlier and deeper, dictated by the exhaustion of physical work. This cycle was repeated year after year, so predictably that seasonal sleep patterns became almost ritualized. In the winter, when work slowed and darkness fell early, people slept longer, often returning to segmented sleep. The colder months allowed for more dreaming, storytelling, and spiritual contemplation around the hearth. In Islamic cultures, prayer times profoundly shaped the sleep cycle. The Fajr prayer, held just before sunrise, meant that many devout Muslims would rise while it was still dark. After prayer, it wasn't uncommon to either begin the day slowly or return to bed for a second rest. The structure of the day was built around rhythm and devotion, which meant sleep had to adapt. Similarly, in monastic life, particularly within Christian and Buddhist traditions, sleep was fragmented by religious obligation. Monks in medieval European monasteries often woke in the middle of the night for matins, a prayer service held in near darkness. Afterward, they might return to sleep or remain in meditation. The schedule was designed to remind the body of discipline and the spirit of eternity. Sleep, in this context, was both sacred and structured. In Japan, Zen Buddhist monks sometimes practiced sleep sitting, especially during periods of intensive meditation. Seated in lotus position with a cloth tied around their waist and back to prevent falling over, they would drift in and out of short rest states while remaining technically upright. These sessions weren't long, but they were intentional, resting just enough to reset the body without disrupting mental focus. Even festival and market life influenced sleep. In pre-industrial cities, when certain markets opened before dawn, vendors and laborers adjusted their rhythms. People who worked in bread ovens, for instance, began their days in the middle of the night. Their families adapted around them. Evening meals were earlier. Beds were shared and rotated. And entire blocks of neighborhoods in cities like Cairo, Istanbul, or Naples would quiet down at odd hours, not from laziness, but from sheer necessity. This kind of flexible sleep was normal. There was no single, correct schedule. People listened to the needs of their bodies, their faiths, their weather, and their work. And somehow, within this constantly changing rhythm, they still found deep rest. It's only in recent history, with strict 9-to-5 jobs, artificial lighting, and the expectation of productivity around the clock, that sleep became rigid. The idea that we must fall asleep at exactly one time and rise at another is a modern invention. But history shows us another path. One where sleep was responsive, personal, and shaped by the flow of life. Where waking in the night wasn't a problem, and a nap after lunch wasn't a failure. It was part of a wider human rhythm, slower and more forgiving. And perhaps that rhythm, once so normal, is worth remembering. In the spaces between rest and ritual, people have long turned to the natural world for help sleeping. Long before pharmacies or sleep clinics, ancient communities leaned on the quiet power of herbs. Not just for physical healing, but specifically to calm the mind and prepare the body for night. And these herbal remedies were far from random. Over time, trial and observation formed deep traditions of plant-based sleep support. Take valerian root, for instance. This gnarly-looking plant has been used for more than 2,000 years. In ancient Greece, physicians like Hippocrates and Galen recommended it for sleeplessness and nervous disorders. Its strong, earthy scent was thought to have sedative properties, and even today, modern studies have confirmed its gentle effect on calming the nervous system. In powdered or steeped form, it was commonly added to evening tonics or teas. In India, the practice of Ayurveda included herbs like ashwagandha, brahmi, and jatamansi, all known to help balance stress and encourage deeper sleep. These weren't just taken as pills or tea. They were massaged into the scalp, burned as incense, or sipped as warm milk infusions, often with spices like nutmeg and cardamom, both believed to settle the stomach and slow the mind. China, with its long tradition of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, used combinations of herbs rather than relying on just one. A well-known mixture called Xuanzhao Ren Tang, containing sour jujube seeds, poria fungus, and anamarina root, was prescribed for those suffering from restless sleep, anxiety, or vivid dreams. The formulation worked by nourishing the heart and liver systems, which were believed to influence emotional stability and dream quality. In medieval Europe, gardens were often planted with sleep-aiding herbs like chamomile, lemon balm, and lavender. These weren't just brewed, they were hung in bunches over beds, sewn into pillows, or gently crushed and warmed before being inhaled. Lavender, in particular, had a long-standing reputation for calming agitation. Roman soldiers rubbed it on their skin, and medieval healers used it to ease both physical and spiritual distress. And then there's mugwort, a somewhat mystical plant with deep roots in dream lore. Found across Europe and Asia, it was often called the dream plant and used in rituals intended to induce vivid or prophetic dreams. Sleepers would place dried mugwort under their pillow or burn it in low smoke before bed. Some traditions even held that it could keep nightmares away or help one become aware within a dream, what we now call lucid dreaming. In the Americas, indigenous communities used native plants like hops, passionflower, and skullcap to treat restlessness. These herbs were steeped in hot water or chewed in small amounts. Sleep wasn't seen as separate from emotional and physical health. If a person was grieving, anxious, or unsettled, they weren't given something just to knock them out. They were supported through calming rituals, herbal baths, and careful listening. What's remarkable is how much consistency there is across continents. Though the specific plants might differ, the goal was the same: to calm the mind, soothe the body, and create space for natural rest. And it wasn't just about what was consumed. The preparation itself, the slow boiling of water, the steeping of leaves, the warm mug held in two hands, became a kind of ceremony. A message to the brain that the day is done. That sleep is welcome. Even now, a simple cup of tea can carry that same weight. Not because of what's in it, but because of how it's given. As we move deeper into the quiet of night, one detail often overlooked in modern life is the role of sound, not just noise, but intentional, rhythmic sound designed to guide the body toward rest. For thousands of years, cultures around the world developed sleep rituals centered around auditory experiences that helped people transition from waking to sleeping states. One of the most enduring forms of this is lullabies. Every culture has its own version, simple melodies, often sung by parents to their children, with soft repetition and gentle rhythms. But lullabies weren't just for babies. In some traditions, they were sung for the sick, the grieving, or anyone whose spirit needed calming. The melody, even more than the words, was a kind of audible comfort, a signal to the nervous system that it was safe to rest. In West African cultures, for example, lullabies were sometimes accompanied by soft drumming or the use of calabash instruments, creating a slow pulse beneath the voice. These rhythms mimicked the heartbeat, and the effect was physical. People didn't just hear the music, they felt it. Similarly, in indigenous North American traditions, some sleep chants used frame drums or rattles filled with seeds. These instruments weren't loud, they were subtle, repetitive, and grounding. Songs were offered not only to soothe the sleeper, but to protect the spirit as it drifted away from the body during dreams. The sounds created a kind of energetic boundary between the waking world and the dream world. In Tibetan Buddhist practices, sound took the form of singing bowls, whose long, sustained tones were used in meditation and sleep rituals. A practitioner might gently strike or circle the rim of the bowl, creating vibrations that seemed to hover in the air. These tones weren't just beautiful, they were designed to quiet the mind and align the body's internal rhythms with something larger and more eternal. Even today, many people find that the resonance of these bowls can slow their breathing and soften mental chatter before bed. The Romans and Greeks understood the power of sound, too. In wealthier homes, water clocks or small indoor fountains were used to create soft, trickling noise through the night. These weren't decorative. They were purposeful. The sound of flowing water mirrored nature and created a consistent, calming background to sleep. In temples, priests used reed flutes or wind instruments to usher in evening ceremonies, easing the mind before rest. In Islamic architecture, particularly in cities like Fez or Istanbul, the sound of evening calls to prayer marked the slowing of the day. The adhan, carried gently through narrow alleyways, signaled not just spiritual reflection but also the beginning of nighttime quiet. Afterward, homes dimmed, meals were shared, and sleep followed in a gradual descent. Even the natural soundscape was embraced as a tool for sleep. In rural Japan, people often built their homes near small streams or bamboo groves, enjoying the ambient sound of water or rustling leaves. In many parts of Latin America, clay wind chimes were placed outside windows to catch the breeze and create soft, irregular music throughout the night. Today, we try to recreate this ancient wisdom with apps, white noise, rain sounds, ocean waves. But the intention remains the same, to surround the sleeper with calm and rhythm, to offer an auditory signal that says, you can let go now. Ancient people knew what modern science confirms: sound affects the nervous system. Slow rhythms encourage slow breathing. Gentle tones lower the heart rate. The body responds, even when we don't consciously listen. So whether it came from a mother's voice, a flowing river, or the resonance of a singing bowl, sound has always been a bridge. A way to carry us softly from the world of waking into the world of dreams. The night was never just the absence of light. To ancient people, darkness had presence. It wasn't empty, it was alive, full of meaning, mystery, and movement. And because of that, people developed rituals and relationships with the dark that went far beyond simply lighting a candle or blowing one out. Unlike today, where artificial light allows us to delay darkness almost indefinitely, ancient life followed the sun. Nightfall arrived early, especially in winter, and people adjusted not just their activities, but their emotional and spiritual posture. There was reverence for the night. It was a time for secrets, storytelling, healing, and the sacred. In ancient Mesopotamia, darkness was personified in myths as both a threat and a teacher. Some tablets speak of dreams and visions that came only when the stars were visible, when the world was still. The night was seen as a canvas on which the gods could write. People sat quietly, watched the stars, and waited. They didn't fear the night so much as they listened to it. The Maya and other Mesoamerican cultures viewed night as a journey through the underworld, a realm not of death alone, but of transformation. Sleep was considered a kind of rehearsal for this nightly passage. Priests and timekeepers observed the positions of stars and planets closely, using them to mark shifts in energy, not just time. Dreams that occurred on certain nights of the lunar cycle were interpreted more seriously than others. The veil between worlds was considered thinner in darkness. In Hindu tradition, certain gods and goddesses are associated with the night, not as sinister, but as powerful. Kali, for example, represents both destruction and creation. Meditation and chanting done at night were believed to open deeper doors in the soul. Some spiritual seekers purposely kept vigil, staying awake through the darkest hours not as punishment, but as devotion. In ancient Judaism, the day began at sundown, not sunrise. This idea, still observed in Sabbath traditions, places rest and darkness not as an end, but as a beginning. The quiet of night was the first step in renewal. Evening prayers, recited by candlelight or oil lamp, were not just routine. They acknowledged that darkness had a role in wholeness. Physical light, when used, was deliberate and symbolic. Oil lamps in the ancient world were often shaped with meaning: lotus flowers in Egypt, birds in Greece, and hands or suns in Rome. Lighting them wasn't just practical. It was ceremonial. The flame offered protection, yes, but also focus. It created a center around which thoughts could settle and stories could unfold. Families often gathered together to mark the shift from day to night. In some traditions, silence was observed briefly after the lamps were lit, creating a threshold between two modes of being. What followed wasn't activity, but withdrawal. Stories told. Prayers whispered. Bodies arranged for sleep. In many indigenous cultures, darkness was a teacher. It was when animals moved differently, when spirits walked, when ancestors might visit in dreams. It was when vision came not from the eyes, but from within. Today, we often rush through the dark. We fill it with screens, fluorescent bulbs, distractions. We rarely sit with it. But for much of human history, darkness wasn't something to get through, it was something to enter. It invited stillness. It encouraged inwardness. It taught patience. And perhaps that's one reason people of the past seemed to sleep more deeply. Not just because they were tired, but because they honored the dark and let it wrap around them like a friend. As darkness deepened and night settled over ancient communities, people turned inward, not just to rest their bodies, but to tend to their dream lives. Sleep wasn't simply a means to recover energy, it was seen as a sacred opportunity to connect with knowledge, memory, and the unknown. In this way, dreaming was a practice, not just a byproduct of rest. In many parts of the world, dreams were recorded with as much seriousness as history. In ancient Egypt, dream journals were sometimes etched into stone or written on papyrus scrolls. Temples maintained records of communal dreams, believing they held divine messages, medical guidance, or omens. A dream of water, for example, might indicate emotional cleansing. A dream of fire, personal transformation. These interpretations were part of formal education for priests and healers. Similarly, in Assyrian and Babylonian cultures, clay tablets detailing symbolic dream meanings were part of a broader divinatory tradition. A king might consult a priest after a troubling dream. Soldiers, before battle, often fasted and slept in temples to seek clear visions in their sleep. It wasn't just mysticism, it was strategy. In Greece, the connection between sleep and dreams was formalized through the practice of incubation. Patients at Asclepian healing temples would purify themselves through fasting and ritual before sleeping on sacred grounds. The dreams they experienced were not seen as random, they were believed to be direct messages from the god Asclepius, often visualized as a serpent. If a patient dreamt of being touched or spoken to by the god, it was interpreted as a healing had already begun. Some people even trained themselves to recall and work with dreams. In certain Hindu and Buddhist teachings, advanced practitioners used dream states as part of their meditation and awareness practices. Dream yoga, as it's sometimes called, isn't New Age invention, it dates back centuries. Practitioners learn to stay conscious in dreams, to explore them with clarity, and to use them as tools for spiritual insight. In medieval Islamic tradition, dreams were not only personal experiences but also theological topics. Scholars like Ibn Sirin compiled entire volumes of dream interpretations rooted in Islamic scripture and cultural symbolism. Dreams were categorized, some from God, some from the self, and some from troubling forces. Yet all were considered worth reflecting upon. It was said that if a person dreamt of something 3 nights in a row, it should be written down and examined with care. In indigenous traditions across Australia, the Americas, and the Arctic, dreams were tightly woven into communal life. Elders often acted as interpreters, not to control meaning, but to help young dreamers find personal significance. Dreams could direct hunters, warn of illness, or signal the timing of rituals. Among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the dream time refers not only to sleep visions but to the very spiritual fabric of creation. In this worldview, dreams connect us to ancestors and timeless truths. The modern notion that dreams are random brain noise would have baffled these cultures. To them, dreams were part of the larger rhythm of life. The body slept, yes, but the soul listened, traveled, witnessed. People slept not to escape, but to encounter. And they woke gently, giving space to recall their night journeys. Sometimes dreams were shared aloud, like morning news. Other times they were kept private, held close like sacred texts. What unites all these traditions is a belief that sleep isn't the end of experience, it's another dimension of it. One where wisdom comes not through effort, but through openness. So as the world grew still and the stars wheeled overhead, ancient sleepers knew that rest was more than just silence. It was revelation, waiting quietly behind closed eyes. The power of night wasn't confined to dreams or rest alone. For much of human history, the hours after sundown were filled with rituals of storytelling, acts that not only shaped cultural identity but helped guide minds into a state of emotional readiness for sleep. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were a kind of medicine. In the glow of hearths and oil lamps, families gathered close. From small huts in Ireland to desert tents in North Africa, tales were shared that explained the stars, warned against danger, passed down values, or simply filled the dark with meaning. These weren't the loud, fast-paced narratives of today's screens. They were slow, spoken softly, carried by rhythm and tone. In West Africa, griots, oral historians and storytellers, held entire genealogies and cultural histories in their memory. Their stories might begin during twilight and carry on into the night, especially during long seasonal gatherings. Children would fall asleep mid-story, comforted not just by the tale, but by the voice telling it. It was an anchor, a human sound in the vastness of night. In Norse culture, sagas were told in longhouses, often during the cold, dark winters. These tales included gods, monsters, and brave ancestors, but they weren't just for thrill. They were moral maps, teaching courage, loyalty, and the consequences of pride. Listeners didn't interrupt. They listened, drifted, and dreamed. In China, especially in rural villages, elders were often the keepers of folk tales. Short, repetitive fables with animal characters were told at night to teach children patience, cleverness, or compassion. These stories often ended with a soft laugh or a gentle lesson, creating a peaceful emotional state before bed. In the Middle East, collections like 1001 Nights grew out of a tradition of nightly storytelling. The stories were layered, tales within tales, designed not only to entertain but to prolong attention and slow the passage into sleep. The storyteller, like Scheherazade, often paused at a crucial moment, encouraging anticipation, imagination, and eventual surrender to rest. Even ancient Jewish households featured bedtime parables. These weren't necessarily religious, but they carried ethical insights, tales of justice, kindness, or the tricks to being outwitted. They were passed from grandparents to children in the hush before bed, often while sitting on woven mats or wrapped in wool. But the purpose of these stories wasn't just to teach. They worked physiologically. The steady pace of a known tale slowed the listener's breathing. The predictability of the arc, beginning, middle, end, created a kind of mental lull. And the intimacy of voice, spoken not for a crowd but for a circle, created a sense of emotional safety. In this way, storytelling was as much a sleep aid as any herb or ritual. There's a reason why bedtime stories are one of the last ancient sleep traditions still widely practiced today. Even now, a calm narrative, told in a soft voice, can pull us away from the noise of the day. It gives the mind something to follow, something familiar, but not demanding. Many adults today still find comfort in audiobooks or narrated histories, not because they need the information, but because it recreates that ancient setting, a voice in the dark, telling a story, making the world feel smaller and warmer. So whether it was a hunter speaking of spirits in the forest, or a mother recounting how the stars got their names, the story was more than sound. It was structure. It was sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, sleep came not with force, but with welcome. Among the many threads woven through ancient sleep rituals, rhythm may be the most consistent. Not just rhythm in sound or routine, but rhythm in how people moved through the day, how they transitioned into night, and how their environment signaled it was time to let go. For centuries, sleep was supported not by a single act, but by a patterned approach, an evening flow that prepared the body and spirit gradually. In traditional Chinese households, this rhythm often began at sunset with tea. Not a strong black tea meant to energize, but a warm herbal infusion, often chrysanthemum or goji berry, sipped slowly, in silence or quiet conversation. Lights were lowered. No harsh transitions. The home became dim, and energy settled. This approach wasn't mystical. It was practical. The nervous system responds to soft cues, less light, slower speech, warm liquid, and a feeling of safety. In European peasant villages, the day was often closed with small acts of repetition. The shutters were latched, the animals tended, the fire reduced to embers. The repetition itself, predictable, almost automatic, signaled to the body that it was safe to stop. No rush. No sudden change from stimulation to stillness. People moved gently into sleep, the way twilight moves gently into night. Many Islamic cultures followed a similar pattern. The final prayer of the day, Isha, marked not just a spiritual close, but the beginning of the body's descent. Afterward, families might gather for a final conversation, a small meal, or light reading. Children were encouraged to wash their feet and hands before bed, not just for cleanliness, but to symbolically wash away the day. The rhythm of prayer, conversation, and calm set the tone for rest. In Japan, the evening routine has long been built around bathing. Even today, the act of entering a warm bath at night is more than hygiene, it's a ritual of resetting. In earlier centuries, families might bathe together in a furrow, letting the hot water ease tension from muscles while soft talk filled the air. Afterward, cool robes and warm tea signaled the body to slow down. Tatami mats were prepared. Futons rolled out. The rhythm was deep in the body. Among indigenous communities, the rhythm of night often involved fire. The final embers of the cooking fire became a gathering place. Stories might be told, or songs hummed. Someone braided herbs. Another wrapped children in blankets. This was sleep's rhythm, not individual, but collective. And as the fire dimmed, voices faded, and sleep took over almost imperceptibly. Modern life often ignores this rhythm. Screens glow late into the night. Noise and stimulation continue without pause. We go from bright lights and tasks to expecting sleep in a matter of minutes. But ancient people knew better. They didn't try to fall asleep. They prepared to receive it. And it's not about being perfect or rigid. It's about being intentional. Even one repeated action, dimming lights, sipping warm tea, brushing the hair slowly, can act like a thread in that ancient rhythm. A thread that tells the body, now is the time to soften. These rituals may seem small. But small rhythms, repeated gently, become powerful. They are the heartbeat of sleep across time. The breath of homes that knew when to hush. The subtle signal passed from elder to child, from culture to culture, saying, it's time now. The day is done. And the body, always wiser than we remember, hears it. As we draw closer to the final moments of night's journey, one truth rises gently from the past: sleep was never just about the body, it was about belonging. Ancient sleep rituals weren't simply methods to rest, they were reminders that each person was part of something larger. A family, a cycle, a world that breathed in rhythm with the moon and stars. In pastoral societies, when the stars appeared and firelight danced on walls, people didn't see the end of a day. They saw the return of the sacred. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of memory, tradition, and connection. When you lay down to sleep in such a world, you weren't alone. You were surrounded by ancestors, by nature, by ritual, and by meaning. Even the placement of the bed or mat often reflected that sense of connection. In feng shui, the position of one's head, the flow of the room, the direction of the door, all mattered. Not as superstition, but as a reflection of energy and respect. The body was not dropped into sleep. It was aligned with care. In many indigenous homes, mats were rolled out in a shared pattern, like spokes of a wheel. The circle meant unity. The center, sometimes a fire, sometimes an altar, anchored the group. Even in sleep, people remained oriented to each other and to the earth. The Roman atrium, once the heart of the household, often doubled as a sleeping space for multiple generations. Dreams shared over morning bread created a kind of family language, symbols and impressions passed between generations. Sleep became part of memory itself. What's striking is how little emphasis these cultures placed on control. Today, we speak of hacking sleep, optimizing rest, or forcing our brains into submission. But ancient traditions leaned into surrender. They trusted the body. They trusted the rhythm. And they trusted that by preparing the space, the breath, and the spirit, sleep would come. Even in times of war or displacement, small sleep rituals persisted. A single candle. A whispered name. A shared blanket passed between hands. These weren't grand gestures, but they held the weight of continuity. They said, we are still here. We still rest. We still dream. Some of the most beautiful historical sleep practices came not from royalty or scholars, but from ordinary people. A mother humming softly in the dark. A grandfather drawing patterns in dust to teach a child a story. A young apprentice carving symbols into wood while the town around him settled. These were moments of stillness inside a noisy world. Today, we chase sleep like it's something outside of us. But history reminds us, rest was always within. Waiting. It was built into how we gathered, how we listened, how we prepared. It came not from perfection, but from presence. A shared story. A sip of something warm. The flicker of firelight. A slow breath. A soft voice. All of these were threads in a larger fabric, a human history of letting go each night, not with fear but with trust. And if we listen closely, perhaps we can still hear it. The rhythm. The hush. The invitation. To rest. To dream. To belong. And so, here we are, at the quiet edge of history. Having wandered through ancient temples and firelit homes, whispered chants and herbal brews, shared beds and silent prayers, we return to the simple truth that guided people across centuries: sleep is sacred. Not sacred in a religious sense for all, but sacred in its intimacy. In its gentleness. In its promise that the day may end, but something soft will always hold us as we drift beyond thought. In every culture we visited, sleep was approached with care. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't shamed. It wasn't something to win. It was offered. Prepared for. Respected. In ancient Greece, it was Hypnos, the god of sleep, who was honored not just as a necessity, but as a divine force. In China, dreams were doors to ancestors. In Africa, sleep was a way to remain connected with the land, the body, and the lineage. In Europe, bedtime meant stories, shared warmth, and gratitude for making it through another day. Even in darkness, there was light. A soft lamp. A steady drumbeat. The breath of someone sleeping beside you. These practices weren't quaint. They were intelligent. Rooted in biology, in emotion, and in the understanding that rest is not a break from life, it is life. It renews us, reshapes our thoughts, restores our balance. And when we honor it with ritual, it gives back tenfold. As modern life accelerates, it's easy to forget that for most of history, people didn't try to conquer sleep. They danced with it. They surrendered to its rhythm like ocean waves, letting it rise and fall in its own time. So maybe that's what we're remembering tonight. Not just the herbs and chants. Not just the baths and lullabies. But the mindset. The trust. The quiet willingness to let the world dim and the soul stretch. To sleep is not to stop being. It is to become something softer. And if you've been listening as the night unfolded, whether from your bed, your couch, or somewhere in between, perhaps you felt it too. That ancient thread pulling gently through the hours, whispering that rest is not a reward for doing enough. It's a right. A rhythm. A return. So tonight, sleep not as escape, but as arrival. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts loosen. Let history hold you. And if you dream, let it be rich with memory. Not of what was lost, but of what has always been waiting. From the Nocturnal Historian, thank you for traveling with us. We'll be here again tomorrow night, with another quiet story from long ago. Until then, sleep well. And good night.